So here we have lot 107 in our fine Japanese art auction on June 12th, starting at 1 p.m. Central European Time. It is also our absolutely wonderful cover piece of this sale. And this is the highly important and exceedingly rare gilt-bronze figure of SENJU KANNON, also known as the 1,000-armed and 11-headed KANNON, or Avalokiteshvara. We're dating it to circa 1300 to 1450, which is consistent with a dating to the late Kamakura period to early Muromachi period. So this alloy, this bronze, is a copper-based composition with a notably elevated proportion of lead and tin. And the reason for this is so that these components that we can see in here are individually cast and also malleable, which is a very important distinction. So what we can see, the way that this figure is made is that it possesses a total of 44 arms, which includes the 4 principal arms here, one of them holding an alms bowl here, and 3 of these arms are now lost. So originally this figure was conceived as 44 arms, and the way that it was made is that we have this base plate here, which is attached. You can see that it's slightly loose here, which would be very easy to fix, but it illustrates how this was made very well, so we kept it this way. So we have this base plate here, which is attached, and all the individual arms. We have a large number of attributes, which include shrines, dharma chakra, clouds, discs, a conch, lotus pods. So incredibly many attributes, and just very important because the later figures, which during the Edo period, they would all have the same casting components and would not have this individual design, which we can see here, which points to a very early dating. Furthermore, the Heian bronzes of this type would be much more solid, so cast as one piece, and it just wasn't available at this time to have this individual casting technique. These techniques only developed a little bit later. So the construction of this figure is very important to note. So each arm provided with a tongue or a tenon, with which is then inserted into the corresponding perforation on the plate, which is then attached to the figure. And this is very important to note that there is absolutely no repetition in the casting. Everything is individually made. And the only reason this was possible is because the metal composition has a high proportion of lead, so that it would be very malleable. This is in direct confrontation to the casting practices during the Edo period, when everything was made very much to be repeated, to be able to fix and replace certain sections of the piece if they would become lost. So basically the idea is that this casting procedure is irreversible, leaves no room for error, and is a very, very technical and precise way to do it, and is consistent with bronzes of the period of the late Kamakura to early Muromachi periods. And also we have published a very, very detailed experts report by my father, Alexander Zacke, who is very, very knowledgeable in these types of bronzes, and you can read in its entirety in the catalog. So as for the comparisons, one thing worth noting, there is absolutely no piece which is exactly comparable to this. What we can see is that the iconography of this was much more predominant in the Heian era. So we can see in the museum comparisons very, very similarly crafted pieces. But one distinction of note, these are all crafted in wood, because at the time when this became popular, such bronze casting techniques simply did not exist. They only came to be a little bit later. And here we can see various large figures of the same deity, and you can see that these individual arms were also all crafted, but they were made in wood and then lacquered after. So our figure, in fact, it holds a nice mercury gilding, and over this we can see a lacquer gilding, and it is the assumption that this lacquer gilding was perhaps made later, sometimes in the life of this wonderful sculpture, perhaps during the Edo period. We can also see the various heads here, which are all also individually cast and with incision work. It's all very, very fine. A few of these heads are lost now. But I would say in general, this figure presents exceptionally well, with only the few losses as mentioned, with a really beautiful patina. One can say it really is a one-of-a-kind piece, because there are very, very few examples of bronzes from this period, particularly with these features of all these individually crafted components. As for the provenance, it comes from an old private collection in eastern France, and the estimate here is 15,000 euros to start, with a high estimate of 30,000 euros, which for such an important and rare piece I think is a very reasonable estimate. Of course, there is no reserve. Bidding can begin at 15,000 euros for this piece, and I wish everybody the best of luck to win this wonderful, important artwork. Thank you.